In every era, humanity believes it controls its destiny until something arrives that rewrites the rules. Most people think the Black Death was just a disease, a tragedy, a nightmare, a shadow over medieval history. But what if I told you that behind this horror, behind the bodies and the mass graves, a new world was secretly being born? A world where old wealth collapsed, new fortunes rose from nowhere, power structures shattered, and an invisible economic revolution rewired the future. This is the part of the Black Death they never told you. This is the hidden economic story, the true curse and the true opportunity born from one of history's darkest moments. The plague spared no one. It killed peasants, merchants, craftsmen, crucially, heirs. Entire estates emptied. Banking houses collapsed. Noble lines that had persisted for centuries vanished. And wherever old wealth disappeared, new owners stepped in not because they were villains, but because ambition flourishes when opportunity multiplies in the wake of destruction. To truly understand who prospered during the Black Death, picture Europe at its moment of maximum vulnerability. Ships docked in Genoa carrying plague-ridden sailors. Monks wrote, no bells rang, because there was no one left to ring them. Entire regions emptied overnight. While most documentaries stop at the horror, that's exactly where our story begins. The economic consequences were not temporary, they were structural. The plague didn't merely take lives. It tore down hierarchies. Labor shortages weakened feudalism. Abandoned lands created a property vacuum. Merchant networks collapsed. Banks vanished under unpaid debts. And through every fracture, new winners quietly emerged. The question isn't whether people got rich, it's who and how. To answer, we must trace the overlooked paths of inheritance, consolidation, and ambition in a Europe where half the competition had disappeared. The first revelation, some of the most iconic European names tied to art, banking, nobility, and empire, their rise to the economic void created by the plague. Florence illustrates this clearly. In the late 14th century, as the plague receded in waves, Florence emerged as a city of survivors. Competitors were gone. Trade networks had collapsed. Banking houses struggled. Into this void stepped Giovanni di Medici de' Medici, a noble, not an industrial titan, just a shrewd banker with impeccable timing. He founded the Medici Bank in 1397, just after the second major plague wave destabilized Florence's financial landscape. Many of the city's traditional banking families had lost heirs, partners, or entire branches. The Bardi and Paratisi houses, once dominant internationally, were shadows of their former selves. Giovanni seized the gap. The Medici Bank won lucrative contracts, including managing finances for the papacy, a position likely unavailable if the plague hadn't eliminated rivals. This wasn't just banking. With nobles and merchants weakened or gone, political influence and civic leadership became attainable for those who survived. Without the plague, the Medici might have remained merely successful Florentine merchants. Instead, they became patrons of the Renaissance, producers of popes, rulers of Tuscany, and architects of modern finance. One could cautiously argue that Michelangelo's career owes a part to the Black Death. Florence wasn't unique. Milan experienced an even more striking transformation. The Visconti family didn't just survive, they thrived. When noble lines perished without heirs, their lands reverted to higher nobles or opportunistic rivals. Bernabo Visconti expanded Milan's territory aggressively, absorbing estates of families extinguished by the plague. His successor, Gian Galeazzo Visconti, combined strategic marriages with the era's demographic chaos to consolidate enough power to become the first Duke of Milan in 1395. In another era, such expansion might have taken centuries of warfare. In the wake of the Black Death, it took just a generation. If there were a medal for exploiting inheritance collapses, the Visconti would have been strong contenders. Across the English Channel, the plague created a new class, the upwardly mobile gentry. Families who had never been noble suddenly controlled enough land and wealth to enter politics. Many of these names are lesser known today, which makes their stories even more remarkable. The Paston family, for instance, began as modest landowners in Norfolk. Neighboring estates lost heirs, and the Pastons acquired property at astonishingly low prices or through legal claims. This sudden wealth granted them access to education, courts, and royal patronage. Over generations, they became influential power brokers, chronicled in the Paston letters. They weren't alone. The Della Pole family leveraged trade wealth and abandoned estates to rise rapidly. The Nevilles expanded during plague-induced vacancies, later playing central roles in the Wars of the Roses. Even the Stanley's future kingmakers at the Battle of Bosworth benefited from opportunities reshaping English power structures. The Black Death's economic aftershocks weren't confined to Florence, Milan, or England. Across Europe, a clear pattern emerged. Wherever death created a vacuum, someone stepped in. Sometimes it was a noble house, sometimes a merchant dynasty, sometimes an institution whose members had taken vows of poverty and therefore outlived most competitors. The plague didn't discriminate, but wealth did. Look north toward the Baltic ports of the Hanseatic League. This network of merchant cities, stretching from Lübeck to Riga to Bruges, turned crisis into opportunity. As demand across Europe became chaotic, grain harvests failed, maritime trade suffered, and prices for essentials skyrocketed. Merchants acted with precision, knowing scarcity creates profit. Families like the Vikonchusens in Danzig, the Goslins and the Werendorps in Lübeck expanded fleets while competitors went bankrupt. They bought cheap grain from untouched regions and sold it at high markups in plague-stricken cities. They monopolized timber and salt vital for rebuilding and converted economic dominance into political influence in city councils. Meanwhile, other winners emerged quietly. Monasteries, abbeys and church orders became major landowners. Entire families died without heirs. Monks and abbots perished. Nobles bequeathed estates for spiritual salvation. The church absorbed vast territories like a sponge, consolidating wealth while secular estates fragmented. Donations of land, livestock, vineyards, and mills flowed in from survivors hoping for divine favor. Far from being merely religious institutions, these were economic engines, collecting rents, producing goods, and shaping local economies. The Black Death revealed something simple. When humans panic, they invest in what feels eternal. Yet if any group mastered exploiting chaos, it was Italy's banking families. The Medici, Strozzi, and Pazzi rose, not in a vacuum but in the aftermath of competitors collapsing under plague-induced loan defaults. The Bardi and Peruzzi families, once Europe's financial giants, had already suffered from unpaid royal debts. The pandemic completed their downfall, wiping out branches across Avignon, Bruges, and Constantinople. Into this void stepped second-tier families, promoted by circumstance. The Strozzi rebuilt wealth by buying land at fire sale prices. The Pazzi expanded merchant banking after demographic collapse. Success wasn't guaranteed, but the end of competitors made opportunity irresistible. In a medieval economy, losing heirs meant losing your bank. While elites and dynasties seized the obvious prizes left by the Black Death, the true depth of the plague's economic upheaval ran far deeper, touching the lives of ordinary people in ways historians rarely emphasize. For the first time in centuries, laborers, peasants, and craftsmen found themselves in a position of power. The massive mortality created a scarcity of workers across Europe, and suddenly, the labor market was tilted in favor of those who survived. Wages rose, social mobility increased, and the very foundations of feudal society began to shift. Serfs, who had once been bound to the land, were now in a position to negotiate better terms or walk away entirely. Entire villages found themselves negotiating contracts for the first time, and guilds, previously rigid and exclusive, opened their doors to new members. Apprentices, once confined to decades of labor before advancing, could now rise to master status far sooner than tradition allowed. This was Europe's first real working-class boom, a quiet revolution born from demographic catastrophe. The elites, of course, tried to resist. England's Statute of Labourers in 1351 sought to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, attempting to prevent runaway inflation and maintain the old feudal order. Yet laws, however authoritarian, could not override economic reality. Scarcity had shifted the balance. Ordinary people, previously powerless, discovered leverage, and for a brief, extraordinary moment, they wielded it. Meanwhile, across Europe, the pattern of opportunistic acquisition continued. The economic shifts of the Black Death weren't confined to a handful of cities or regions, they were continent-wide. In Florence, Milan, and England, as we've seen, dynasties rose from the ruins. In the Baltic, Hanseatic merchants expanded their influence. Now consider the broader implications. Monasteries, abbeys, and church orders became central players in local economies, amassing land and production capacity as secular estates fragmented. The Cistercians in France, the Benedictines in Germany, and countless smaller religious orders absorbed property, controlled rents, and influenced political decisions, becoming enduring economic engines that would shape regions for centuries. Even more striking, the Black Death demonstrated a timeless truth about crises. Wealth doesn't vanish in catastrophe. It changes hands. Those prepared, adaptable, and willing to seize opportunity rose. Those rigid, inflexible, or unlucky were swept aside. This principle repeats across history. In 2008, distressed debt investors and private equity firms emerged wealthier from global financial collapse. During the COVID-19 pandemic, billionaires expanded fortunes by trillions, while small businesses disappeared. The tools and context may change structured finance instead of inheritance law. Tech monopolies instead of grain trade, but the underlying mechanism remains constant. Crises accelerate advantage. The long-term impact of the Black Death also highlights a second, subtler form of wealth transfer: social capital and influence. Families like the Medici, the Strozzi, and the Pazzi didn't just acquire money, they gained connections, political leverage, and cultural authority. The Medici, for example, became patrons of the Renaissance, commissioning artists and architects who would define European culture for centuries. Wealth wasn't merely financial, it was power and prestige, multiplied across generations. The Hanseatic League's merchants offer a parallel narrative. While the elite families of southern Europe were rebuilding, these northern traders used the scarcity and chaos to expand trade networks, acquire monopolies, and strengthen political influence within city councils. Families such as the Viscontisons, Gosselins, and Warrendorps expanded their fleets, leveraged trade routes, and effectively turned crisis into long-term dominance. The lesson is clear. Whether in medieval Europe or the modern world, those who anticipate, adapt, and act decisively during chaos emerge disproportionately ahead. Even within the lower classes, the Black Death catalyzed long-term structural change. Serfs who escaped death found themselves with unprecedented bargaining power. Towns and villages negotiated labor contracts for the first time. Apprenticeships accelerated. Skilled workers moved freely between cities, spreading knowledge and innovation. Guilds became more inclusive, integrating new talent that might have otherwise been locked out by tradition. This surge in mobility laid the groundwork for the gradual erosion of feudalism, a silent centuries-long revolution born from demographic collapse. Meanwhile, the church's role in this era illustrates another dimension of wealth accumulation. In an age of mass death, selling salvation proved to be extremely lucrative. Devout survivors donated land, livestock, vineyards, and mills to secure spiritual favor. Religious orders consolidated these estates, producing goods, collecting rents, and shaping local economies. The Cistercians, Benedictines, and other monastic groups expanded their holdings dramatically, gaining wealth and influence not through conquest, but through the quiet inevitability of societal collapse. Even the simplest act of faith became an economic transaction. Italy's banking families demonstrate the interplay between disaster and strategy. The collapse of dominant houses like the Bardi and Peruzzi left a void that second-tier families like the Strozzi and Pazzi filled. Demographic collapse didn't create opportunity alone. It magnified the rewards for those willing and able to seize it. Wealth accumulation became as much about timing, foresight, and strategic maneuvering as it was about capital itself. Yet perhaps the most intriguing lesson of the Black Death is its demonstration of inequality in crisis. Death does not act as an equalizer, far from it. Instead, it amplifies existing advantages. Those with connections, education, capital, or social networks leveraged catastrophe to grow their influence. Those without these resources faced collapse. Disasters, whether plague, financial crash, or pandemic, do not distribute opportunity evenly. They create pockets where advantage compounds. The consequences of the Black Death extend even into modern thinking. It provides a blueprint for understanding the mechanics of crisis economics. The Medici didn't rise because the plague was fair. They rose because the combination of death, scarcity, and foresight allowed them to act decisively while others could not. The Visconti expanded their influence by consolidating vacated estates. English gentry families capitalized on demographic collapse. Hanseatic merchants transformed supply shortages into profit. Ordinary laborers leveraged scarcity to improve wages. Monasteries consolidated wealth through inheritance and donations. In each case, the underlying driver was the same. Chaos amplifies opportunity for those positioned to seize it. By the end of the 14th century, Europe had been transformed. A new elite had emerged from the ashes of death. Ordinary people experienced unprecedented mobility and bargaining power. Religious institutions had cemented themselves as enduring economic players. The stage was set for the Renaissance, for political upheavals, for trade expansion, and for centuries of structural change that shaped the modern world. The irony is profound. The plague that seemed to end the world ultimately created the world that followed. Out of devastation came mobility, consolidation, and new elites. Out of loss came opportunity. Out of chaos came systems that continue to influence our societies today. The Black Death reminds us that disasters are not equalizers, they are accelerators. They amplify advantage, reward adaptability, and create openings that the prepared can exploit. History repeats patterns, if not exact events. The lessons of the 14th century echo in 2008, in the COVID-19 pandemic, and in every crisis where wealth shifts dramatically while the unprepared struggle. Understanding the mechanics of crisis wealth isn't just historical curiosity, it's a lens for interpreting power, influence, and opportunity in any age. Disasters don't distribute wealth evenly. They create pockets of immense opportunity. Whether those pockets produce progress or exploitation depends entirely on who steps forward. The Black Death reshuffled the deck of European wealth and power, setting the stage for the Renaissance, altering political structures, empowering gentry, strengthening trade networks, and reshaping banking and religious influence. In short, the Black Death didn't just kill half of Europe, it reinvented it. And the most important lesson for us today is clear. In every crisis, opportunity exists, but it favors the prepared, the adaptable, and the daring. Power and wealth do not vanish. They shift to those who act decisively. And that's the story of how the Black Death didn't just take lives, it reshaped wealth, power, and opportunity across Europe. From the rise of dynasties like the Medici and Visconti, to the quiet revolution of ordinary workers and the church's economic influence, the pandemic proved one thing. Disasters don't equalize, they accelerate advantage. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's hidden lessons, make sure to subscribe to Wealth Untold for more stories of lost fortunes, secret opportunities, and the untold truths behind history's wealth. Remember, the past isn't just about what happened, it's about understanding how power and money move, even in the darkest times. Stay curious, and stay ready, because the lessons of history always have a way of showing up in the present.